Ms. Jackson coming to you with another video.
Alright, let's look at the y equals negative sine x. That's the same thing as y equals negative 1 sine x. And my a is negative 1. The negative in front of the variable will cause the function to reflect over the x-axis. In other words, flip over. My b is the coefficient in front of the x variable, which is also 1. And my period is 2 pi over the absolute value of 1, which is 2 pi. So again, my function y equals negative sine x is going to have the same angles as my sine of x graph. All right, so those angles are 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. All right, so for this one, I'm going to make it the same little t-table I make every time. So I have x, I have 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. My function is y equals negative sine x. So I'm going to plug in 0 first. So the sine of 0, again, is 0. And 0 times is negative 1. I'm going to put negative 1 here so it won't confuse me. So negative 1 times 0 is going to be 0. The negative 1 sine of pi over 2, I know that pi over 2, the sine of pi over 2 is 1. So there'll be a negative 1 times a 1 is equal to negative 1. Negative 1 times the sine of pi. The sine of pi is 0. So that'll be negative 1 times 0, which is 0. I have negative 1 sine of 3 pi over 2, which is negative 1. The sine of 3 pi over 2 is negative 1. So it'll be a negative 1 times a negative 1, which is positive 1. And then I have negative 1 sine of 2 pi. The sine of 2 pi is 0. So that'll be negative 1 times 0, which is 0. So I have a point at 0, 0. And I have a point at pi over 2, negative 1. All right, I have a point at pi 0. And I have a point at 3 pi over 2, positive 1. And then I have a point 2 pi 0. So this time my graph is going to look something like this. And again, this is not drawn to scale because it's crooked here. All right. So this is a reflection over the x-axis. All right. So this is actually one period for this function. So my x-intercept would be 0, 0. I have another x-intercept is pi 0, and then 2 pi 0. And then my minimal point is going to be pi over 2, negative 1. And then my maximum point would be 3 pi over 2, comma 1. All right. And that is for this graph. All right.